نعم.
Okay, so here it is. It is al-an'am. Al-an'am, and we talked about al-an'am, basically the different cattle. Okay, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So we were actually doing still Surah al-An'am. We're still on it. Of course, we're going to be on it for quite a while. And last time, وَقَالُوا لَوْلَا أُنزِلَ عَلَيْهِ مَلَكٌ وَلَوْ أَنزَلْنَا مَلَكًا لَقُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ. And I think it's important to talk about one thing when we're speaking about the different signs. So I loved a very good summary that ChatGPT really gave me. Okay, and that's in regards to the different the different let's say ways to the different ways or the different philosophical arguments to refute atheism. And I loved how, it was so organized and basically gave me, and by the way, my husband actually wrote a couple books just about these arguments right here and how we basically look into these arguments to basically refute the different claims that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not exist. Okay, so let's say, and I was looking into it, the cosmological argument basically talks about everything that begins to exist has a cause. Since the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause, and that cause must be outside of time and space, eternal, powerful, and immaterial, much like God. Okay, so remember how we were demonstrating that basically in Surah Al-An'am, but I guess they're just putting it in a fancy way, okay, in a fancy word, calling it the cosmological argument. And here you go. So when you're looking at Alhamdulillah الذي خلق السماوات والأرض وجعل الظلمات والنور, that's basically within that cosmological argument, trying to I guess bring it in a way to understand when we would speak of those different evidences, how the Quran actually speaks of that and uses this argument as well. The other one is called the teleological argument. The universe has complex order, fine-tuning, and the design implies a designer, just like a watch implies a watchmaker. The precision of natural law suggests intentional creation, not random chance. And basically, that's taking us to the same part. So, what are we talking about in this category? We're basically talking about looking at the design itself and seeing the fine tuning on how everything was created. We would see in the surah itself, basically telling us, well, looking at the way that you were created and seeing the fine tuning basically from the way that things are created, and basically having the different causes that come out of that. In other words, the design itself and how accurate everything is in relationship with the different things in energy coming out of the different matter, and therefore seeing that this is a sign of creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So looking at that piece of it and letting us see that the precision of natural laws basically tell us that this is not a random chance. This was not but something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or it was created with an intention, in other words, a purpose behind it. Then, of course, it talks about the moral argument. Things, well, we would see that there are moral values, but that isn't until later on in the surah. We're going to see in Surah Al-An'am, it basically brings in the moral argument as well. We're going to see that down the road. The ontological argument, I don't know why it didn't give me the ontological argument before the moral argument. So let's just go with this order. That one, it argues if we can conceive of a perfect being God, he must exist, because existence is part of being perfect. And here we go. This is basically what the surah right there takes us into. وَهُوَ اللَّهُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ. Basically telling us into that ontological argument right there, since we would say وَهُوَ اللَّهُ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَفِي الْأَرْضِ, and basically letting us see that that existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which was basically brought to our knowledge through al-Wahy. So I thought it would be good to kind of let you see some of these arguments right there, and at the same time, give it the fancy names that you would see in the books of the philosophy books, and I guess anthropology books and all of that. And I thought it would be would be a good idea to let you see let's say the words in Surah Al-An'am and the fancy names that they would basically give for the same exact arguments. And of course, the spiritual evidence, the surah would also get into telling us, well, who's the one that answers your prayers, who's the one that gives you all those different sentiments that you would recognize. And of course, certainly that in the end, in order to tell us that that the Quran, or at least the different religious evidences in terms of al-Wahy, is basically coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's why it was focusing وَلَوْ نَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ كِتَابًا فِي قِرْطَاسٍ فَلَمَسُوهُ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ لَقَالَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا سِحْرٌ مُبِينٌ. So then emphasizing how some would want to reject the evidences, not necessarily based on an objective reason, as much as it is a biased reason to just simply not want to know the truth. And certainly then the ayat would take us into the other areas of how it brings forth basically our tawheed in place. I thought it would be a good idea, so let's kind of look at that. For those that would like to take a screenshot right there, thought it would be a good thing to see right there. Let's say the ayat, we're basically going into these different types of arguments: the cosmological argument or kalam, the teleological argument, the moral argument, the ontological argument. Just look into these, and certainly, the other pointers, basically the fine-tuning and the information in the DNA, and certainly the different spiritual experiences, and certainly the different religious texts and the prophecies, in other words, miracles and all of that. So that's basically what the surah was simply putting in a nutshell, but giving it, I guess, in a way where it is understood by the people that are very simple and the people that would want to go in further details in whatever field that they're in. Okay, وَلَقَدْ اسْتُهْزِئَ بِرُسُلٍ مِّن قَبْلِكَ فَحَاقَ بِالَّذِينَ سَخِرُوا مِنْهُم مَّا كَانُوا بِهِ يَسْتَهْزِئُونَ. So then, of course, telling us that the main reason, so this is basically taking us into the psychology, and that's what we did last time, the psychology of those that would want to reject the message isn't necessarily coming from a standpoint where it's evidence to refute the evidences that were basically put forth and laid out in the ayat, whether we're talking about the design, or whether talking about the cosmological area, talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creation, the cause and the effect, the world, the fine-tuned world, etc., that basically lies all around you. And then the ayat would expose the disbelievers in doing what is actually called ad hominem. What is that? So instead of refuting the argument, it's basically attacking the person. It's trying to sway the argument from talking and of course tackling the main idea, to using the different types and different methods to, one, sway the argument. So they'll basically attack the person, whether speaking about, for example, speaking about the person coming forth with an evil intention, accusing their intention, or probably accusing that they're just right there, nothing but in a delusion, or basically that's accusing their mental state, accusing their integrity, accusing their of course, their intention, etc. And that's the method that oftentimes is used also against the mu'mineen as well. And you would say that this happens on college campuses often, that the professors or even students can sometimes attack the students' intentions and say, well, you're coming in with an idea full of hate, you're not appreciate, you're not being inclusive, and all these different terms. And it's quite interesting that the Western imperialism, I guess right now, is pretty much the leading world in creating a term and then defining that term based on their own interests. So, for example, creating the term, let's say, terrorism, and then they would define, well, what makes terror? And then the word terror becomes specific to their terms and their definitions. And then certainly without you realizing, you're right there stuck with and cornered with a lot of questions. Are you against, for example, Hamas? And you would be, okay, what am I going to say? Am I going to be cornered with these questions? Do you condemn condemn terror? Do you condemn this? When in reality, the one that's committing terror is probably, well, not probably, but is basically whoever's bombing Gaza or who's ever supporting it, whether it's the Arabi name or whether it's Zionism or whether it's called the US or whatever it is, right? So whatever is doing the terror, that's supposed to be considered that terror. But of course, then we end up being cornered because they, through media, manage to, one, create the term, two, define the term based on the terms that they basically want to lay out, of course, based on their interest, imperialist reasons, etc. Then it becomes within whatever is going to be in their service. So the term becomes another, whether it's a word, war of words, or whether it's an ideological war, or whether it's a war, a psychological war. So then it becomes this war where they're the ones that are defining the terms, they're the ones that are defining and making the word, and then you cannot adopt that word and say, well, let me redefine it, because they've got the media machine to define the words to make sure that the words go in the interest of those imperialist powers. Okay, so when you look at the ayat and basically telling us how many times they would shift the argument by one, using new words, two, shifting it to ad hominem, attacking the person and not basically responding to the arguments. So then the ayat would basically tell the Prophet ﷺ, well, the prophets before you were also mocked in the same way. In other words, they weren't responding to the argument, they were more attacking the person, and you are being attacked in the same way. But فَحَاقَ بِالَّذِينَ سَخِرُوا مِنْهُمْ. But it would still come back to them. In other words, just by thinking that you are speaking louder, it doesn't necessarily make you right. And just because you are mocking the prophets, it doesn't make your confidence necessarily right, because your confidence is supposed to be based on the evidences that support that argument, and not necessarily just speaking louder or mocking the statement. And because in the end, truth is not about making up the truth, but it's about finding the truth. It's about discovering the truth, because the truth, the purpose, the purpose preceded creation itself. The purpose itself came before the creation, therefore it is founded. It is basically created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you don't make up the reason, but you basically discover the reason, whether it's discovering certain evidences to show that there is a purpose, or whether it's going back to the textual evidences in order to find the reason. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Then go, and this is basically telling those, whether it's the believers or the disbelievers, to take the time to explore, navigate on earth. ثُمَّ انظُرُوا كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. And navigating basically in seeing the consequence of those that had denied Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is that telling them? That you don't judge, you don't determine what the consequence of whatever choices and whatever you had determined. You don't judge and determine that, but it's basically done by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, realizing that just because you may get away with that denial now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be forever. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is right for the time being. You manage to get away with it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, He overcomes His decree, the purpose that He had created overcomes their will and what they want the truth to be. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then goes into the argument. قُلْ لِمَن مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And to that dialogue, tell them, قُل. And we talked about the word قُل and what it contains, and we said that it contains that pride that a Muslim must have when they're doing da'wah, that they have to speak with confidence, they have to speak with pride, they have to basically demonstrate Allahu Akbar in their identity. But if you're coming in and assuming that the liberalism is basically the liberal philosophy, or secularism is basically what I'm going to be using as the paradigm or as the standard to judge Islam with, then you're definitely coming from the wrong standpoint. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that no, don't fall for that. Don't whatsoever fall thinking that whether it's liberalism or whether it's the philosophy of John Locke or the philosophy of David Hume or whomever it is, don't think that that's the standard that you're going to be judging Islam based off of, but it's the opposite way. Whether we're speaking about morals or whether we're speaking about the understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding of God, or whether we're speaking about truth, or whether we're speaking about human rights, women's rights, children's rights, whatever it is, and talking about morality and so forth, as a Muslim, you have to come from the standpoint of recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center of truth. So the ayat were basically coming to demonstrate for the believer that you have to come forth with one, you're standing and one, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ, you're standing with the full confidence, basically letting them explore, navigate on their own. We're not here laying it out for you, but we're not imposing it on you, but we're letting you go ahead and explore, see for yourself, let the world, let history, and certainly let your experience lead you to recognizing that one, there is a purpose that preceded your existence. Two, that purpose that preceded your existence basically relates to the free will that you have. You were given free will not because you are to use that free will for entertainment, but it was given to you to basically apply a certain purpose, and that is apply a certain principle, and that is basically the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created your existence for, and therefore there's supposed to be a blueprint of, well, what does that principle look like? Why then was I created? How do we prove that? So that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically says, well, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Let's begin with that. I want you to navigate, look at the earth. I want you to travel. I want you to study history, study archaeology, and see what people had done there. And where did they go wrong? What did they apply right that worked and that brought advancement? Well, not only advancement in this life, but even advancement morally and within that civilization. And what brought the regression and what brought the end of a certain society? What moral things did they practice or not practice? And that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَيْفَ كَانَ عَاقِبَةُ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. What was the consequence? What was the result of those that were liars? Telling us that what actually makes and acts as the foundation of creating a civilization is truth, is honesty, is integrity. And once people go off truth, once they deny the fact that basically is finding this world basically that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center and basically is the founder, whether we're speaking about the fine-tuning, whether we're speaking about the creation, nature, etc., or whether we're speaking about what not only puts the structure of nature, but also sets out the structure that we should be channeling our own free will in. So how do we channel our free will? Why were we given that in the first place? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then lets us know that, well, the beginning of any regression was going to be starting from one, at-takdhib, lying, denying the truth, denying the foundation that basically is apparent to them in nature, apparent to them in the scripture, apparent to them basically in their experience as well. They would recognize that, well, there is definitely supposed to be a structure. There's definitely life, death. There's something that is beyond me that is determining when I sleep, when I wake up. That means I'm also going to be determined to when I was created and when I will be laid to rest or laid to basically death. And that means there's an outside control beyond myself that's determining a set of different things about my life that I cannot control. So therefore, those that want to deny these facts that are basically speaking in the most or in the clearest terms, they would be the ones to fall in التكذيب. Then, قُلْ لِمَن مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Then tell them. Now, what are we doing? So in the first one, just give them the time to just explore. Is there anything that I should be looking for in terms of purpose? Now, how am I going to study the purpose? Well, I want you to look at how people live their life. In other words, and what the consequence was, basically the cause and effect. How did this structure happen? I want you to see how their free will gone wrong, how it basically determined the consequence of their life. In other words, your free will, if you had misused that free will, just like in this life, the free will that you had probably taken and probably decided to, I don't know, consume drugs or whatever it is, how it affected your body, and then later got you probably suicidal, sick, whatever it is, and made you lose your job, lose your family, etc. So what was it? It was the free will gone wrong. That resulted into, of course, you denied the fact that this addiction was going to affect you, but then insisted that you running after this entertainment was going to give you some satisfaction. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, well, that was those mukadhibeen, those that had denied the truth. They basically did not channel their free will in where it belongs. قل لمن ما في السماوات والأرض قل لله. Make that announcement. When you would ask them, well, who's the one that was the creator of the heavens and the earth? So now it jumped from letting us navigate the free will and where it's going and the purpose and where it's going to then قل لمن ما في السماوات والأرض. Then recognize, well, who's the one in ownership? Who's the one that owns the heavens and the earth? What is the ownership supposed to entail? Ownership is supposed to entail authority. Authority is supposed to mean that he is the power that controls the way things function and where they're heading and why they're functioning that way. Therefore, the Lord Almighty would have the power, since it is beyond your power, and certainly you don't control the heavens and the earth, and certainly you don't even control your own body to make it probably decide, I don't want it to pump blood, or probably decide to, maybe I want you to start doing your job, kidney or liver or gums or whatever it is. And in fact, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us, or the Prophet ﷺ actually taught us the dua. Taught us the dua, Allahumma la takilni ila nafsi tarfata ayn. Ya Allah, don't let me be responsible of any of my matters, not even with a blink of an eye. Because if you were going to be responsible even for blinking, you would definitely find yourself going blind. Because with each and every single second, you're basically blinking, and who's the one that's doing the job for you? It's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who's the one that designed the body to do that job? It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now you would recognize that whether it's a blink of an eye, or whether it's your body in its different functions, or whether it's in the magnificence of the heavens and the earth, it's قل لله. Say it in your loudest words. Say it in your loudest testimony. قل لله. Tell them and make that announcement. It's basically belonging to the Lord Almighty. كتب على نفسه الرحمة. He had determined upon himself that basically his mercy comes prior to any punishment. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically created the heavens and the earth to give you the chance to seek the Lord Almighty's mercy. So now that this is the chance, make sure you use that chance, and make sure فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Run to the Lord Almighty. For why? لَيَجْمَعَنَّكُمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. For he will combine you, he will resurrect you on Judgment Day. And this lamb and this noon right there is a word of determination on a Judgment Day. لا ريب فيه, where there's no doubt in it. What is that supposed to be meaning? This is basically to tell us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just as he had created the structure, whether we're speaking about materialistic structure, or whether we're speaking about the timing of it, or whether we're speaking about what comes first, the chronology of it. And in the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he decrees a matter, it is going to be as he decreed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not an impulsive God where things would just change based on some feeling or some occurred thought. You would be an impulsive human being, but the Lord Almighty is not impulsive. When he creates, he decrees the matters. When the Lord Almighty determines something, there is no change in that decree, and therefore you recognize that this is the ultimate truth. The Lord Almighty is not an impulsive Lord, but the Lord Almighty, when he decrees, لا ريب فيه, there is no doubt in it. الذين خسروا أنفسهم. So therefore, that when we recognize that the Lord Almighty is not an impulsive Lord, And therefore, it is for your own sake and for you to determine whether you would want to take advantage of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy and basically head to the mercy, or الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ, those that had lost themselves, those that had lost the opportunity, are basically فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ, are those that do not believe, those that had determined that they did not want to take the advantage of embracing one, the Lord Almighty, and recognizing that He is basically the one that all the good things, all the things that I have in this life are basically coming from the Lord Almighty, and therefore I would have to turn to the Lord Almighty in that testimony. And two, therefore, فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. And number two is basically, well, in applying the words, applying the principles of the Lord Almighty. وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ. To every, of course, we're not just talking about movement or things in movement or things in motion, but we're also talking about the things that are idle. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَهُ مَا سَكَنَ فِي اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. And everything that is subtle throughout the night and throughout the day basically belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. Well, why is السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ? Why all hearing? All hearing because we would usually think during the night or when something is subtle that it doesn't have a sound, that it doesn't have a sound. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, even the things that may appear to you as being idle, that they actually have a sound that you may not recognize, because to you, the way that you would hear the sound of something is when, of course, there's a vibration, and the vibration basically signals and lets you hear things with the eardrum basically vibrating, sending messages to your brain and blah, 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 and then you're basically hearing things. Okay, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, no, even the things that you see as idle, even the things that you would see are not making a sound, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is hearing its sound and therefore cannot go past His authority, cannot go past His power. And Al-Alim, He's all-knowing of everything that is in motion or everything that basically functions in this world. So therefore, if we're speaking about ما سكن في الليل والنهار, basically all the different things, whether we're speaking about things that are thinkable creatures or non-thinkable creatures, they basically are under the power of the Lord Almighty, and they would be under the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to basically oversee and supervise what is happening. Well, if He's supervising ما سكن في الليل والنهار, everything that is subtle throughout the night and throughout the day, therefore you as a creature that is basically one of the small creatures on this universe, then you cannot get away with any subtle or movement or probably place or time, and therefore you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala contains and it has al-ihata, basically surrounds all that you do, and therefore you would recognize the magnificence of the Lord Almighty. And that's why it comes in with that recognition. قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. Then tell them, should I be taking other than the Lord Almighty as a place of authority, as al-wali, as the Lord, as al-wali to mean authority, as al-wali to meaning that I would seek refuge to? فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, when He is the creator and the founder of the heavens and the earth. وَهُوَ يُطْعِمُ وَلَا يُطْعَمُ, and He is the one that feeds and is not fed. What does the feeding have to do with all of this? That's basically coming in to let it in simple terms Let us know that the provision that we get, that our survival means, we don't make the survival means. The survival means, whether we're speaking about airway, whether we're speaking about our air breathing, or whether we're speaking about, hey, the different things, that nutrients that we probably need from the world around us in order to keep us functioning, or whether we're speaking about, of course, the way that we would maintain our health, etc. That's basically to keep us aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one, just as He is the creator, and just as He basically feeds and provides, and nothing is given to Him. That's in order to let us know that قُلْ إِنِّي أُمِرْتُ أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ. Now say it, and say it loud and clear, that I was ordered to be amongst the first that had submitted to their Lord Almighty. So let's take it one by one. قُلْ أَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ أَتَّخِذُ وَلِيًّا. Should I take other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as al-wali? Al-wali, as the one in power, as the one that basically I seek refuge, seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically, as since He is the one in authority, since He is the one in power, since He is the one that controls everything, then therefore I would recognize whether the foundation of myself or the heavens and the earth, or whether the functioning of it, and to make it basically continue with its motion, with its progress, with doing what it is supposed to be doing, then I cannot but submit. And here we go. This is it. I cannot then but announce my submission to the Lord Almighty. And that's why it said, أَنْ أَكُونَ أَوَّلَ مَنْ أَسْلَمَ, to be the first and amongst the first of those that had submitted to the Lord Almighty. وَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, and do not be amongst the disbelievers. قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ إِنْ عَصَيْتُ رَبِّي. Now, wait a minute. Why did it jump into speaking about قُلْ إِنِّي أخاف إن عصيت ربي? I fear if I would disobey the Lord Almighty, a torment that is magnificent. Why did it jump from there? Because certainly, let me break this down. When we take the decision to be courageous, what are we technically doing? Is it that we're not afraid? No, we are afraid. But we had decided to consider a bigger fear, even if that meant going through a smaller fear. And that's important to keep in mind. In decision making, especially women, I think it's important to recognize that, because in decision making, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was determining, or basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ruled that a woman would have a wali for marriage. Why? Because usually as women, we lack al-aql. What is al-aql? Al-aql is determination. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, "I'qil wa tawakkal." I'qil, tie that camel, and then just depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we lack that determination because we're not daring. Because we usually have our fears basically in one place, but then we don't have that daring psychology willing to get into danger to protect ourselves from a bigger danger. This is important to keep in mind. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically within this context, قُلْ إِنِّي أَخَافُ إِنْ عَصَيْتُ رَبِّي. What is the inference here? When it says, and say, I fear if I were to disobey my Lord Almighty, that there would be a magnificent or a torment that is on a day that is magnificent. What is the inference? How did we get there? The inference is, maybe I could use a different word. What was this in response to? This was in response that when you had announced that you had become Muslim, that you had submitted to your Lord Almighty, that second that you announced that you were submitting to Allah and not submitting to their threats, and not submitting to their punishments, or probably maybe the persecution. So then they would be coming at you to warn you, you're going to lose your job. You're going to have to accept our terms, or you're going to lose your job. You're going to have to accept our terms, or you're going to be standing out from the rest of the crowd. You're probably going to be laughed at. You're probably going to be seen as backwards, and the list goes on and on. So the inference right there is telling us, I want you. Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us what they were threatening us with? No. The ayah didn't say anything about what they were threatening us with, because that can be in all the different shapes and colors out there. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is bringing in, there's that word right there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not letting us, and not letting their word of threat be mentioned and be noted, because as a believer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, I don't even want to mention what they were threatening you with, because it's not even worth it. But I want you to redirect your focus, that the fear that you should be concerned of is the fear that if you were to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now that's going to be the punishment that you would be in fear of. Don't be afraid of whatever they might be threatening you with. Losing the job, taking away your green card, or whatever it is, deportation, or probably all those different kinds of threats, or maybe kicking you out of the house, or whatever it is. Don't be afraid of all those threats. As a Muslim, you recognize that no power goes beyond the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't tell us what their response was when you had said, I'm amongst the first Muslims. He didn't tell us what their response was. He just let that be something that it's not worthy of mention. He just let that be as something that is more of a temporary fear that possibly that you might be having, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that the true fear that you should be fearing is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. من يصرف عنه يومئذ فقد رحمه وذلك الفوز المبين. So what should I be afraid of? من يصرف عنه يومئذ فقد رحمه. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had dismissed for perhaps maybe sins that they had committed, dismissed, and basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just dismissed their sins, or probably just dismissed them to enter Jannah. And it's like, you're dismissed, you can now go to Jannah, Ya Rabbi. فَقَدْ رَحِمَهُ. And then that's the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically included in His mercy. وَذَلِكَ هُوَ الْفَوْزُ الْمُبِينُ. And that would be the magnificent and the apparent and the clear victory, and the clear fawz, and the clear basically fawz, basically of course achievement. وَإِيَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. And just know, whenever يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ, wait a minute, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually harm us? Does He inflict harm on us? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not inflict pain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not inflict, absolute pain. But that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَمْسَسْكَ اللَّهُ بِضُرٍّ. What does that mean? That the pain that you might be going through, it's mess. It's just a touch of pain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not decree absolute evil, but it can happen that a person might get cancer. an inflammation, whatever it is, or the death of a loved one, that's only mas, dur. That's just a touch of some of that evil, but the Lord Almighty does not inflict you with absolute pain. That was just a touch of evil. That's just a touch of pain. Let me use that word instead, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not inflict evil, but may inflict pain. Okay? فَلَا كَاشِفَ لَهُ إِلَّا هُ. And despite all of that, whenever you would go through probably and possibly a painful experience or something that might be traumatic, etc., just know, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that no one has the power to remove and uplift the pain but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِن يَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ فَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And if you were to get any good, and this is the mess, يَمْسَسْكَ بِخَيْرٍ, and if he were to touch you, and if he were to fill you with any good, then he is all powerful to do everything. Why? وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. What is al-Qahir? Al-Qahir is the one that's capable of doing something and you being hopeless and helpless to change the decree. That's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having that power to make you helpless in rejecting the decree and hopeless but in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore you would only have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to uplift whatever decree happened. فوق عبادة. I want you to look at the fawqa. Fawqa means beyond. Fawqa means over. Fawqa means that it is coming from up above. Whatever things that are happening to you, it's coming from up above, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is qahir. He basically overcomes human, basically now when we're speaking about al-ibad, whether we're speaking about human power, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overcomes whether human power or overcomes whatever is surrounding their structure with, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is determining, one, because he is al-Qahir, because your power whatsoever cannot go beyond the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because his power is what has the ability and what has the power to determine everything. So since his power overcomes your power, that's why he said فوق عباده, so over or beyond your power. وهو الحكيم الخبير, and he is all wise and basically all knowing, all wise and all knowing in how this power is basically going towards the purpose that he had created. قُلْ أَيُّ شَيْءٍ. Notice that قُلْ again. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wanting you to speak in pride again. قُلْ أَيُّ شَيْءٍ أَكْبَرُ شَهَادَةً. Ask them, what is the biggest witness? What is a bigger witness? What is a bigger evidence? قُلِ اللَّهُ شَهِيدٌ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكُمْ. Then tell them and respond. Even though you ask the question, you're the one to ask the question. But even if they don't give the right response, you ask the question in order for them to think about it. But then you come forward with the response. قُلِ اللَّهُ شَهِيدٌ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكُمْ. Say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the witness between me and you. وَأُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ هَذَا الْقُرْآنُ لِأُنذِرَكُمْ بِهِ وَمَنْ بَلَغَ. To conclude, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed that wahi, the words of the Quran, in order to warn you and whoever basically received the message. أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَشْهَدُونَ أَنَّ مَعَ اللَّهِ آلِهَةً أُخْرَى. That you are associating and basically associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but قُل لَا أَشْهَدُ. But say, I don't witness this. I don't belong to your confession about finding or about associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But قل إنما, look at that قل, few قلs. قل إنما هو إله واحد. And say that He is only one Lord. وإنني بريء مما تشركون. And I am innocent of what you associate partners with in regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we're going to stop right here. There's definitely a lot more to say, but I'm extremely tired today, but I couldn't skip tafsir. I had to at least make this note for at least just this portion, and inshallah, of these ayat. So any questions before we conclude, because I'm extremely tired, wallahi.
سلامة قلبك
حبيبة قلبي، الله يبارك فيك يا ربي.
وسلامة أسنانك.
الله يرضى عنك يا ربي. جاي ضربتني بفكي، فكل ما بحكي بتحسيها بتشد علي، بس الحمد
يا
لله.
رب مأجورة مأجورة.
آمين يا ربي، آمين آمين. So if there are any questions, inshallah, we'll be able to answer them, inshallah.
أسأل زي رب الله يشفيك زي ما يشفيك يا حبيبتي.
آمين يا ربي، الله يحفظك يا ربي ويبارك فيكي. So inshallah, we'll see you all tomorrow. And I know I was supposed to be doing Husn al-Muslim. Believe it or not, I even prepared for it and got it ready, but I'm so tired to do it today. So inshallah, we'll do it tomorrow. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت.
السلام عليكم.